Have you ever wondered why no African country has ever imposed sanctions on a Western nation? In reality, this has never happened. While the West frequently uses sanctions as a tool to maintain global dominance and suppress any country that challenges its influence, African countries remain passive. Recently, Uganda, Niger, Gabon, and the Central African Republic were excluded from the US-led African Growth and Opportunity Act. These were not random exclusions. They were direct results of sanctions imposed for adopting policies that didn't align with Western ideologies. The message was clear: obey the West or face punishment. For example, after Uganda passed an anti-LGBTQ law, the US quickly responded with visa restrictions on officials. The European Union, not far behind, banned travel for the military junta involved in Niger's coup. These measures were not about human rights or legality. They were about power, coercion, and control. The West acts collectively, punishing dissenting nations, often offering them a cruel choice: surrender your independence or suffer consequences. What's alarming is that the international community rarely questions this behavior. Western nations dominate the world's most powerful institutions, such as the UN Security Council, where permanent members like the US, UK, and France hold veto power. This gives them immense leverage to push their own agenda, often at the expense of smaller nations. Africa, despite having 54 countries, has never responded in kind. No travel bans, no economic restrictions, nothing. Why? Some argue it's due to Africa's economic dependence on the West. Others believe it's high time African nations rethink this one-sided dynamic. Sanctions can work both ways. What if Africa united and imposed reciprocal sanctions, travel bans on Western officials, restrictions on companies that exploit African resources, or even penalties for historical crimes such as colonization and the assassination of African leaders? Take Eritrea, for example. In 2009, it was sanctioned by the UN Security Council over accusations of supporting terrorism in Somalia. Arms sales were banned, aid was suspended, and financial transactions restricted. Years later, no concrete evidence ever surfaced. Yet, the damage was done. Eritrea's economy was devastated for nearly a decade. Meanwhile, Western countries committing atrocities in Africa continue business as usual, immune from consequences. Even more disturbing is how African institutions like ECOWAS and, at times, the African Union have become tools of Western influence. These organizations suspend and sanction fellow African nations, often echoing Western demands. Countries like Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, and Gabon faced harsh penalties after coups, but not always from their own people. These sanctions were often driven by Western geopolitical interests, using African institutions as their enforcers. But now, the tide is beginning to turn. Sanctions have failed to prevent repeated coups across West Africa. Defiant governments in Mali and Burkina Faso are openly questioning Western influence and forging new partnerships, particularly with Eastern powers like Russia and China. Even the African Union has begun to show signs of asserting its own will. Like in Chad, where it prioritized security over outside pressure, the imbalance is glaring. Western-backed African leaders accused of corruption and human rights violations are rarely targeted. But leaders who dare to oppose Western dominance, they face isolation and punishment. This double standard has led to a rising call across Africa, a call for self-determination, sovereignty, and a radical shift in diplomatic relations. It's time to stop seeking validation from the West and start charting a new path, one based on mutual respect, accountability, and true independence. Proposed actions include sanctioning Western countries for their past and present exploitation, banning polluting foreign companies, and removing foreign military installations from African soil. Africa is rich in critical minerals like cobalt, essential for modern technology. What if the continent chose to control and limit the export of such resources to nations that exploit or disrespect it? This isn't just about economics. It's about dignity, justice, and the future. African nations are no longer willing to be pawns in a geopolitical game played by others. They are waking up, aligning with new global powers, and choosing to remain non-aligned in what some call the new Cold War. In a historic shift, 20 African countries recently declined to condemn Russia at the United Nations, signaling a refusal to be dragged into conflicts that aren't their own. If the West continues to impose unjust sanctions, underestimate Africa's unity, and disregard its aspirations, it may find itself on the losing side of history. Africa's journey toward total liberation is no longer a dream. It is becoming a reality. The world is changing, and Africa is ready to change with it.